Audrey had barely wrapped her fingers around her coffee cup when she heard her sister's voice cut across the restaurant. "Emma," Melissa called loudly, smiling as though she were making a joke everyone should enjoy. "Family eats here. Go find a seat by the trash cans." Every conversation at the table stopped for a heartbeat. Audrey forced a small smile. "It's Audrey." Melissa shrugged. "Whatever, the family table is full." No one moved. Not their parents. Not their cousins. Not a single aunt or uncle. Instead, several people chuckled awkwardly before turning back to their expensive meals, as though nothing unusual had happened. Audrey looked at the empty chair beside her father. Another beside her cousin. Someone could have made room. No one even tried. The only available seat was a tiny table beside the restaurant's service station, close enough to hear dishes clatter into plastic bins every few seconds. She stood there another moment, waiting for anyone, to say this had gone too far. No one did. So she carried her coffee to the lonely table beside the trash, while the people who called themselves her family raised glasses in celebration. As she sat down, a server wheeled a cart stacked with dirty plates behind her. The smell of leftover food drifted through the air. At the large table across the room, everyone laughed over appetizers she hadn't even been offered. Melissa lifted a champagne glass. "To family," she announced. Everyone cheered. Audrey stared into her coffee. This dinner was supposed to celebrate her promotion. After 12 years of 80-hour weeks, she'd finally become a senior financial analyst. Melissa had insisted the entire family deserved to celebrate together. "Don't make any plans," she'd said over the phone. "This one's all about you." Yet from the moment Audrey arrived, it had become painfully obvious that she wasn't the guest of honor. She wasn't even treated like a guest. Servers carried platters of steak, seafood, and desserts to the main table, while Audrey was never asked whether she'd like to order anything beyond the coffee she'd requested while waiting. A few nearby diners glanced between the two tables. One elderly couple exchanged confused looks. Even they seemed unable to understand why one woman sat completely alone, while the rest of the party ignored her. Audrey considered standing up and leaving. It would be easy. She could walk straight through the front doors, drive home, and never think about this ridiculous dinner again. But experience stopped her. Leaving would become another story Melissa could tell. Audrey ruined the celebration. Audrey embarrassed everyone. Audrey overreacted. Keeping the peace had become Audrey's unofficial role years ago. She took another slow sip of coffee instead. Then, a few minutes later, the same young server approached her table carrying a black leather check presenter. Without hesitation, he placed it directly in front of her. "Whenever you're ready," he said politely. Audrey frowned. She opened it. At the bottom of the receipt sat one number: $2,950. The laughter from the family table disappeared. Every pair of eyes turned toward her. Nobody looked surprised. Nobody questioned why the bill had been placed in front of the woman eating alone. Melissa simply leaned back in her chair with the faintest smile. Audrey closed the check holder. She took one last calm sip of coffee. Then she slid the leather folder back across the table toward the server. "I think," she said quietly, "you've brought this to the wrong person." Before the server reached for the check, he hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said carefully. "Management asked me to give it directly to you." Audrey looked up. "To me?" "Yes, you're listed as the host for tonight's reservation." She blinked. "There has to be a mistake." His polite smile faded into uncertainty. "I don't think so." Across the room, Melissa continued chatting as though nothing unusual was happening, occasionally glancing toward Audrey's table to see what she would do. Audrey lowered her voice. "I didn't organize this dinner." The server frowned. "You didn't?" "No." For the first time, he looked genuinely confused. 3 days earlier, Melissa had called with unusual enthusiasm. "We're celebrating your promotion," she'd said. "The whole family's coming. Don't worry about planning anything, just show up." Audrey had smiled. "Should I bring dessert? Maybe a bottle of wine?" Melissa laughed. "No, we've got everything covered." Looking back now, Audrey remembered the details she'd ignored. Whenever someone asked how much dinner would cost, Melissa changed the subject. When an uncle suggested everyone split the bill, Melissa immediately replied, "Let's not make this complicated." Then she'd look straight at Audrey and joked, "Besides, now that you're making the big money, you're finally useful." Everyone had laughed, including Audrey. She'd laughed because that was easier than asking whether Melissa meant it. The joke didn't feel funny anymore. It felt rehearsed. And it wasn't the first time. Over the years, whenever the family faced an unexpected expense, eyes somehow drifted toward Audrey. She usually paid to avoid arguments, convincing herself it was easier than saying no. Tonight felt different. This wasn't a last-minute favor. Someone had planned this. Back in the restaurant, Audrey looked at the server again. "If I'm supposedly the host," she asked quietly, "whose idea was it to put my name on the reservation?" Before he could answer, Melissa's voice echoed across the dining room. "Audrey," she called loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "are you seriously holding everyone hostage over a family dinner?" Several diners turned to watch. Audrey slowly realized this wasn't just another family slight. Someone had deliberately arranged every part of this evening. Who had put her name on that reservation? Melissa pushed back her chair before the server could answer. "There we go," she announced with an exaggerated sigh. "I knew she'd make this difficult." Every head at the table turned toward Audrey. Melissa smiled as if she were the reasonable one. "Audrey has always taken care of the family," she said loudly enough for nearby diners to hear. "She's just pretending to be surprised because she hates attention." Several relatives nodded. "She's always been generous," one cousin added. "Thanks again for dinner," another said with a grin, raising his glass. Even Audrey's father gave her a small, uncertain smile, as though expecting her to stop arguing and make the problem disappear. The silence from her own parents hurt more than Melissa's performance. Audrey stood, keeping her voice calm. "I never agreed to pay for this dinner." Melissa laughed. "Oh, come on. We talked about it weeks ago." "No, we didn't." "You've forgotten already." I would remember agreeing to spend nearly $3,000. The restaurant had grown noticeably quieter. Conversations at nearby tables faded as more people watched the exchange. The young server shifted uncomfortably between the sisters. Finally, Audrey turned toward him. "I'd like to speak with your manager, please." Melissa folded her arms. "Seriously, you're going to embarrass the whole family over one bill." "I'm trying to understand why my name is attached to it." A few moments later, the restaurant manager approached carrying a reservation folder. "Ms. Bennett," he asked politely. "Yes." "You are listed here as tonight's host and primary payer." He opened the folder and showed her the reservation confirmation. At first glance, it looked official. Melissa's shoulders relaxed. For the first time all evening, genuine confidence crossed her face. She believed the paperwork had ended the discussion. But Audrey kept reading. Then something caught her eye. "This isn't my email address," she said quietly. The manager looked down. She pointed again. "And that's not my phone number." She scanned the bottom of the confirmation. "I've never signed my name like this." The manager's expression changed. "There was another issue earlier today involving the reservation," he admitted carefully. Before he could continue, Melissa stepped forward. "That's irrelevant." She looked around at the family. "Can someone tell Audrey to stop wasting everyone's time?" Several relatives began murmuring in agreement. Ignoring them, Audrey met the manager's eyes. "I'd like to see every document connected to this reservation. The manager hesitated for only a second. Then he lowered his voice. "There's one message you should probably see first." The manager gave Audrey an apologetic look. "Would you mind stepping over here for just a moment?" She nodded and followed him a few feet away from the dining room entrance. Through the glass partition, she could still see Melissa laughing with the family, acting as though the conversation was already over. The manager opened the reservation folder. "There are a few internal notes attached to this booking," he said. "I think you should read them." He handed her several printed pages. The first page contained the reservation details. The second listed special requests. The third stopped Audrey cold. "Please present the final balance directly to Audrey Bennett. She will cover the entire bill regardless of attendance. If there are any questions, I'll handle the family." Audrey looked up. "Who sent this?" The manager pointed to the printed email address. It came from the organizer. The sender's name read, Melissa Carter. Audrey continued reading. Another document detailed the restaurant's standard pre-authorization process. At the bottom was a note, entered only hours earlier. "Pre-authorization declined. Organizer instructed restaurant to continue. Alternate payer, Audrey Bennett." The manager spoke quietly. "Your sister told us your card would be used instead. She assured us you'd already approved everything." Audrey felt the pieces fall into place. She hadn't been seated beside the trash cans because Melissa wanted to insult her. That had only been part of the plan. Keeping Audrey separated meant she couldn't compare stories with anyone else before the bill arrived. Melissa needed the entire family to finish eating first. Only then could social pressure do the rest. The manager sighed. "I truly believed you knew about this. If I'd suspected otherwise, I would have stopped the dinner immediately." "It's not your fault," Audrey replied, folding the documents carefully. "You were given false information." She took a slow breath. "Would you come back to the table with me?" "Of course." Together they walked toward the dining room. The family's conversation gradually faded as everyone noticed the manager carrying the reservation file. Melissa's confident smile weakened. Audrey didn't accuse her. She didn't raise her voice. She simply placed the documents on the center of the table. One by one, relatives leaned forward to read them. Whispers replaced laughter. Melissa looked from face to face before forcing a nervous smile. "This is being completely misunderstood." The manager remained composed. "I'm afraid there's still one document no one here has seen." Melissa's face drained of color. She shot to her feet. "Don't read that out loud." Nobody moved. Melissa stood frozen beside her chair, her eyes locked on the folder in the manager's hands. "I said don't read it," she repeated, this time without the confidence she'd carried all evening. The manager remained calm. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your family deserves to understand why this payment dispute occurred." He opened the final page. "This email was sent this morning by the event organizer." His voice carried clearly across the now silent dining room. "Please bill Audrey Bennett directly. She won't argue. She always pays when the family is involved, even if she complains at first. Do not ask her beforehand because she'll make it awkward." Silence settled over the table. No one laughed. No one reached for another bite of food. Audrey's father slowly looked toward Melissa. "You wrote that?" Melissa swallowed. "It wasn't meant the way it sounds." The manager continued. "There is also a follow-up message confirming that the organizer's payment card was declined during pre-authorization and instructing us to proceed because Ms. Bennett would cover everything." He closed the folder. At no point did Ms. Audrey Bennett authorize payment or identify herself as the host. He turned toward Audrey. "On behalf of the restaurant, I sincerely apologize. You are not responsible for this balance." For the first time all evening, every eye shifted away from Audrey. They settled on Melissa. Her younger cousin leaned back in disbelief. So, you invited all of us knowing you couldn't pay. An uncle frowned. And you planned to dump the bill on Audrey. Melissa looked around desperately. I was going to explain later. When? Audrey asked quietly. After they finished dessert. Melissa opened her mouth, but couldn't answer. Their mother lowered her eyes. I watched my own daughter sit beside the trash cans, she whispered. I never even asked why. Their father rubbed his forehead. We all assumed Audrey would take care of it. Because she always has, Audrey replied. Her voice never rose. For years, it was easier to pay than argue. Every emergency, every forgotten reservation, every last-minute expense somehow became my responsibility. She looked around the table. I thought keeping the peace made us closer. She paused. It only taught everyone that my kindness had no limit. The words landed harder than any shouted accusation. The restaurant manager turned back to Melissa. As the organizer, the outstanding balance remains your responsibility. If payment cannot be completed tonight, we'll need to make other arrangements. Melissa's shoulders slumped. Several relatives quietly reached for their wallets. One cousin shook his head. We'll cover our own meals. Another nodded. We should have done that from the beginning. Within minutes, the bill that had been intended for one unsuspecting sister was divided among the people who had actually attended the dinner. Melissa was left responsible for the remaining unpaid balance created by her failed reservation. No one looked to Audrey to fix it. As the family prepared to leave, apologies came one after another. I'm sorry. We should have spoken up. I didn't realize what was happening. Audrey accepted each apology with a polite nod, but she didn't pretend the evening hadn't changed something permanent. Outside the restaurant, her father caught up with her. I hope you'll come to the next family dinner. Audrey smiled sadly. Maybe. He waited. But next time, she continued, everyone can pay for their own seat. Weeks later, family gatherings looked different. Reservations were made openly. Costs were discussed before anyone arrived. No one volunteered Audrey's wallet without asking. Some relatives grew closer to her than ever before. Others drifted away with Melissa, unwilling to admit how easily they'd accepted her version of events. Audrey didn't chase either group. She had spent too many years buying peace that was never truly offered. This time, she chose something worth keeping instead. As she walked to her car, she glanced back once at the restaurant entrance, then smiled to herself. Family isn't the people who expect you to pay for a seat, she said softly. They're the people who would never make you earn one.